Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's coffee break. My name is Emily Andrews. I'm the Executive Director of the USGBC-Missouri Gateway Chapter, and we are excited to have you here this morning for this networking opportunity with the USGBC-Missouri Gateway Chapter. We have some members with us this morning and some non-members, and so I want to thank everyone for joining us. Our chapter, like many other nonprofits, rely on donations for funding, including our membership. So if you're not already part of the organization, I definitely encourage you to join. The goal of our coffee breaks is really just to provide an opportunity for our community to engage in different hot topic conversations over a cup of coffee or whatever morning beverage you choose. I'm drinking water this morning. And our theme for today is the Living Building Challenge. We'll talk more specifically about the waste and water petals of the Living Building Challenge. And this is the second of three International Living Future Institute, our ILFI focused coffee breaks. Last week we did a net zero energy building profile of a local building that's currently in operation. Today we're talking about the waste and water petals, and next week we'll be hearing about the Declare label for healthy building products. So that'll be fun. And this is all kind of leading up to a two-part charrette that we're doing with Earth Dance Farms to help them envision a healthy and water-wise restroom facility. So that's coming up in May, and we'll drop those links in the chat. So today I'm excited to introduce our guest, Madeline Smith. Madeline's the Sustainable Development Manager at Clayco Enterprise. She works to reduce the environmental impact of the built environment and focuses on third-party certifications, innovative sustainable technologies, building energy analysis, and assists in internal corporate responsibility. Most recently, she's worked on the LEED Gold certification of the WashU School of Medicine, BJC Mid-Campus Center. And she's also a Living Future accredited professional of the LFA. So that's why she's here to talk to us about the Living Building Challenge. Madeline, you want to take it away?
Perfect. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Freddie. Thank you both for putting this on. I think it's great to have these quick meetups, and we don't have to commit too much time, but we can still learn about all of the different things in our sector right now. So I'm really excited to talk about Living Building Challenge, and specifically water and waste. They're a huge component of the certification and something that we really need to start focusing on. So let's see here. Like Emily said, I'm Madeline Smith. Work at Clayco. I've been here for about 6 years. I've been very fortunate that I've gotten to work on, about 40 LEED projects. I've worked on Living Building Challenge projects. And we've also done Fitwel, Green Globes, Park Smart, Well, and so we're just looking at all the certifications, seeing what works best, and also consult with our clients on all of the different sustainable features that they can add to their buildings. So as Emily said, we're going to talk, I just want to give a quick background on Living Building Challenge. So this is unique in that there are petals, because each certification has their own unique branding and verbiage for their categories. But so there's these categories, and within Living Building Challenge, they're actually all prerequisites if you're pursuing full certification. So that's a distinguisher, and that's really what sets it apart as being a holistic, aggressive, way of the future as far as certification goes. So they each have different, things that they focus on within each of the categories. And today we're just going to focus on two. So like we said, the water category has two different features. And today we're going to talk about net positive water for half the time. So net positive water is a really important thing, especially as we're seeing with climate change, the weather and water availability is drastically different across the country, across the world. So it's really important for resiliency for these buildings to have something set in place so that they can rely on their water in any type of circumstance. So I will also say it comes with some of the largest challenges because you're dealing with gray water and black water on site. And as far as regulations go, this can be really difficult working with cities just because of the health implications that come with this. So it really is looking at having a week's supply of drinking water for your building and not having any potable water used for non-potable sources. All of these things make sense. And the other thing that's interesting about living building challenges, the scale jumping component. So you are able to, if there are surrounding areas or buildings that are looking to do something similar, you can work together and make your systems more efficient. This does not include, working with a utility provider, but having something holistic and working with surrounding areas is always beneficial. And the other thing that's important to note is that they require that you're not using any harsh chemicals. So that's another thing that can provide a challenge when you're trying to do this on a project, because for sanitation purposes, it makes people uncomfortable and concerned about any issues that are coming down, especially when it comes to code. So that being said, there have been many successful projects that have achieved this, and the solutions are out there. It's very possible. So we can talk a little bit more about solutions in the discussion part, but I also want to go through the materials. So the materials have a great, robust list. The red list has originated from ILFI. That's something that's referenced a lot about not using specific chemicals. The red list encompasses everything that could be a risk to both people and the environment. So it's something that's referenced a lot and is really beneficial. But we're also going to talk about net positive waste. So for net positive waste, again, this is the most, what we're looking for in an ideal circumstance. And it looks at everything from design, construction, operations, and end of life when it comes to the building. So it's not just talking about the construction waste, it's really talking about everything. The one thing that I really appreciate about the net positive waste is that in the design phase, it gets you thinking about constructability and deconstructability and being able to have flexible spaces. So when you're designing spaces, obviously buildings and uses and needs change throughout the lifespan of a building. And having that flexibility of being able to easily change spaces without having to do large demolitions, that is a huge part of waste. So that's something that we're looking at. And then also it challenges the project teams to look at salvage materials, making sure that you're incorporating things that you might not necessarily look at to begin with. And I think the other thing that it forces project teams to do is really come up with a robust plan at the beginning of the project, as opposed to trying to retroactively say, okay, we have all this waste on site now, what are we going to do with it? So like I said, it goes through the entire life of the building and then looking at the end of life phase. So there's lots of programs right now that have been very helpful with take back. I know, especially in the carpet industry, there's a lot of take back programs that you can look at. So looking at those programs at end of life when you're selecting materials up front is really beneficial. And also just using materials that can be easily recycled, reused, all of those good things. So I think that while this is challenging, and the other thing with waste is that it really depends on the location as far as the construction and demolition waste management. So if you're in an urban area that has, the services able to recycle construction demolition waste, it can be very easy. It should be no cost add. But if you're in a rural area that doesn't have access to those types of facilities, or you would end up shipping it long distances and then ending up using that carbon emission in the shipping process, you kind of have to weigh out the options and make sure that you're making the right choices. So interestingly, location of your project does weigh in when you're looking at the net positive waste. So this is just a brief overview of these two things. Obviously, when you get into the logistics and the details that come with planning for net positive water and net positive waste. It requires several charrettes, making sure that everyone in the project team is on board. And at the same time, while it's different from what we're doing right now, and it may require some upfront work, it's very achievable for both of them. And I think a lot of the time when we're talking about Living Building Challenge, people can be overwhelmed with the fact that they are all encompassing when it comes to these key categories. But we have the technology right now. And if you have the right team, the resources and solutions are out there. And I would love to have a discussion about these. And I know Emily and Freddie, you guys have some questions, but I also just wanted to ask the audience if anyone's had any experience with trying to do net positive water or waste, and any challenges or solutions that you've experienced firsthand.
Thanks for your presentation, Madeline. I think that's a really good question. I'd love to hear from anyone who might have some thoughts or experience, or even if you've kind of worked through the design side of things, but maybe not implemented anything.
Given the amount of projects, I know that, working on the design side, that's a good point, Emily, that a lot more people probably have experience in the design aspect than the implementation, just because of the challenges that we talked about. But so any and all experiences is welcome.
I'm curious about, and I don't know if this is super related, but capturing water from permeable pavement systems and using that in irrigation. I think that's something that we had proposed at Parkway, and it seemed like too big of a lift, but I was curious if there's any projects nearby that have done that, or if that relates to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were collecting the rainwater, was that in some sort of system under the paving? Mm-hmm. Okay. And was the issue just the cost of creating that infrastructure?
I think so, because there'd have to be some kind of filtration and then pumping system, and hoping that the pavement area is nearby a field that we need to irrigate, or right. If it's not, then creating all the infrastructure to get the water to where we need it.
Yeah. So was that in an area where there weren't several buildings, or was it just in addition to potentially capturing rainwater from buildings?
Yeah, I would say it's just in when we're replacing or adding on to pavement at, like high schools where there's huge parking lots. A lot of times we were doing permeable pavement systems. And so we would capture it underneath, but then I think it's mostly just like a slow release system instead of being able to actually use that gray water somewhere else.
Right. And I know, especially with asphalt, if that's the type of material you're using, the filtration can need to be more robust depending on what you're using it for. I don't personally know of any projects that have done that locally, but I think that that's a great, it's always good to have these ideas come up initially so that people can start thinking about it and brainstorming of ways to make it more cost effective or easier to implement.
I think typically what I've seen more of locally is just capturing the stormwater or the rainwater in some sort of swale or cistern and letting it slowly infiltrate back into the groundwater system, as opposed to rushing into the combined sewer system. Because the whole idea of collecting it from permeable pavement and then pumping it back into something is, I think, really challenging and expensive, and potentially presents a lot of maintenance issues. The other use is cisterns to use the gray water, collecting it from a roof, say, like Alberici has a giant cistern in their parking lot that I think most people don't realize unless they've toured that building or know the background. And so they collect the rainwater off the roof. And I think it gets used in the toilets, actually. At least that was the initial design. So Wanda's got a question.
Hi there. Well, maybe not a question. I wanted to share just a couple examples at the St. Louis Zoo where we've been able to, and this not living building challenge projects, but where we've been able to utilize pervious pavers and then divert the downspouts coming off the roof nearby to kind of divert into our lake system. And so it's not, I mean, essentially it is diverting water for a use where we would otherwise be, supplementing that, those lakes with potable water. So kind of another way of presenting that solution. So we were able to do that on a lead project at the Candy Crossing project in the center of the zoo. And then recently we also did that at a new Stingray LSS life support systems building that we just completed. So just a couple examples.
Awesome. And that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I always say about certifications is the certification can be the ultimate goal, but they also provide all of these wonderful frameworks and suggestions and things for projects to think about. So even just assessing them and saying, okay, we can do maybe 2 of these things on a certain part of our project, that's still really impactful and beneficial as opposed to doing nothing, for sure. So I think when people look at net positive waste and net positive water, it might not be possible or financially feasible upfront, but selecting where it could be is still really, really great.
I would love to ask a question as well for the net zero waste aspect, from the perspective of toilets and that kind of thing. I think that's a big challenge. I know that here locally in our region, there's really very few examples of that, actually meeting that net zero threshold. So I was curious if you could maybe speak to that a little bit and any challenges that folks on the call have run into on that.
Yeah. So, and I think, are you saying with regard to the net positive water, just treating the sewage that comes with? Yeah. So absolutely, this is something that has to be extensively worked out on every project that tries to pursue it. And ILFI has also come to understand that some municipalities just aren't willing to agree to that right now. So doing the infrastructure and setting it up for in the future, if code is to change, is a way that a lot of projects have started that process without going all the way. Because, like I said, treating black water is a touchy subject for everyone, as it should be, because there's lots of health risks that come with it. So I think that that's a great interim solution, is to start coming up with the infrastructure in ways that that you would switch over in the future without necessarily having conflict with code. Has anyone else had any experience with that? I think that it's rare, for sure.
I know that in the process of doing a little bit of research in advance of the charrette with Earth Dance, I found that the Bullitt Center in Seattle, which is like a large office building. I mean, it's not huge, but it's a living building, and they initially had a composting toilet system in the building, which they had removed since it was built. And they've got a little white paper, a little lessons learned about composting toilets, which I'll just share a link to that here.
I would love to read that, because I toured it, I think 3 years ago, and it was still active. Maybe it was it might have been more like 4 years ago. They had on-site monitoring so that they couldn't use this. The city wouldn't approve tying it in to anything else without it being tested on site. So they actually had staff in the basement that was testing it before they were able to use it. At the time
before they could use the compost, you mean?
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, it sounds like it was really more about I mean, they ended up tying back into the municipal system. I think it just was, I mean, in a smaller application, I feel like that makes more sense than in an office building, but.
Well, and that's a good point, that the upfront cost and overcoming code compliance and everything is just the first step. The operations and maintenance of those types of systems is a whole other challenge that you have to make sure you work through. Because I know even with something as simple as like low flow fixtures, I know in some circumstances, a lot of buildings have challenges with the maintenance of those types of facilities.
Yep. Yeah. I did also look up the system that's at the Tyson Living Learning Center, the composting toilet system that's there, and kind of looked up where it was being used in other places. And it's interesting. There's a number of like applications at like botanical gardens in on the East Coast and things like that. So I do actually think that it's a good possibility for this Earth Dance project because it's so small, but we'll see. So yeah, we'll see what the folks in Ferguson and their public works department have to say about it, I suppose.
Madeline, could you just remind me, for anyone that's not familiar with the living building certification, can you apply for a petal without doing the full certification? Can you remind me how that works?
Yeah, so they recently came out, well, I guess it's not recently anymore. A couple of years ago, they came out with the core certification, which are categories in each of the, imperatives in each of the categories that are required for any level of certification. And then the core certification has to do with achieving 3 complete categories. So you can, if one or two of the categories is just not possible, you can still achieve some level of certification. So that's a great point. Bringing up that they've become a little more flexible, which I think was needed to get more people involved, because I think the core certification has been more successful, just that it's, easier to achieve and helps project teams focus on the things that they are really passionate about and things that make sense for their project without having to blanket all of the challenging things on top of it. Wanda, have you guys looked at Petals certification?
We are discussing various certification systems right now for different projects. And, we would certainly love to do that, but that is such a high bar. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's there, all the certifications right now are kind of on the table for some of the master planning that we're doing. And there may be some appropriate, portions of projects or certain buildings that might make sense to pursue that. But we're definitely in a planning mode right now. So I don't have any for sure's right now, but I actually I had a question, if we have a minute still, about if you could speak to the cost. I know this is kind of a hard question, but the cost of incorporating like a gray water system in a building, because there is, there's real costs there, right? Like for, you're kind of doubling your plumbing systems, if you will. So I don't know if anyone can speak to that a little bit, just from experiences you might have had on projects.
I typically dabble with estimating. I associate from afar, so I get to see their process, and I do work upfront with project teams trying to put together budgets for the different certifications. So I think a lot goes into that estimating depending on the location. So for example, on one of our projects, we were doing a underground cistern, and we actually had to do a concrete pad on top of it so it wouldn't float up because of the water table. So there's all types of costs that you don't even think about. But I think that depending on the location and depending on what you're using it for, there are cost-effective methods, of course, So it's of course a very generic answer because I think it just depends on a lot of different factors, but there's certainly a wide range, I would say, when it comes to gray water, what kind of costs you're talking about. And that might be like a good situation where, okay, you start on one building and test it out and make sure that that's the system that works for your project. And then especially if you're doing master site planning, before scaling it and potentially having really large costs.
So I think it would be just from the zoo world. Cincinnati Zoo has done some really amazing stuff around just sustainability in general, but they actually have a living building petal recognized like exhibit that is like their new Africa exhibit. And they installed a huge underground cistern on their new parking lot that feeds several of the portions of that exhibit. So I'm just mentioning that if you guys want to look into it, it's really neat. And I don't know if anyone here follows Fiona the baby hippo, but that exhibit is like all rainwater. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible what they're doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because zoos use a lot of water from feeding to cleaning and all that good stuff. Yeah.
And I think that St. Louis is in an area where there definitely would be enough rainwater for certain purposes. Yeah, because I know in other areas that might be a challenge, but at least we have the quantity of water. Any other questions, comments, experiences? Well, as a plug for our next charrette, if anyone wants to continue this conversation, we can apply it to a real project. And we're hosting one of the two at Clayco, one of the two charrettes that we're going to have. So look out for more information on that. I think Freddie posted a link to it.
Yeah, we did post links in the chat to the different charrettes. The first one will be on May 17th, and we'll be at Earth Dance Farm for that to get a sense of the space and to hear from their staff on what they're kind of envisioning for the purpose of this facility. And then we'll be at Clayco the following week on the 24th to do the more of the kind of like, in the weeds of planning things. So we're looking forward to that. And then hopefully Earth Dance will be able to use what we kind of turn over to them as a tool for fundraising and moving forward with things. So thanks so much, Madeline, for your presentation. I'm really excited to learn more about these two petals and encourage people to take a look at what they're doing in Cincinnati. I'm excited to learn about that as well. Thanks, Wanda, for sharing. And thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you at another upcoming event. Like I mentioned, we've got another coffee break next week on the Declare label, and then we'll be the following week on May 10th, yes, is our annual Green Building Showcase. Yay. Featuring the Butler Building, which I know Trivers is working on, and the University City School District's recent Green Ribbon School designation, which is the federal designation. That's really exciting. And also LEED Zero project that MasterCard has pursued. So speaking of zero, net zero, we have another one to feature. So that should be a good presentation as well in May. And again, thanks, Madeline, and everybody have a great Friday.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Thanks, Madeline.